Revolution in Egypt. After 7 days of mass protests, a people's movement has taken hold throughout the country, demanding the end of Hosni Mubarak's 30 years in power. But the regime is about to fight back. Tahrir, or Liberation Square, in the center of the Egyptian capital, Cairo. Police have melted away. The army has moved in, but has done nothing to stop the protests. The protesters are full of hope that the regime is cracking. They have called for 1 million people to rally in Tahrir Square.
Speaking to one of the protesters there, and I asked them, you've been here for over a week, the president still hasn't left. Do you think that will make any difference? They said today, as far as they were concerned, February the 1st will be a day to live in Egypt's history.
We came early this morning and there were not that many people, but now I have to say the square is completely full. People are determined. What we started is not going back. There's absolutely no fear of the government.
It seems as though every neighborhood of Cairo is emptying out and the occupants are flooding towards the square. There is really a sense of humanity on the move. It is remarkable, the broad cross-section of society you're seeing there.
For the first time in Egyptian history, from Pharaoh till now, Egypt had a genuine revolution.
ليه حرام الحياة تغيير كل سنة يبقى في تغيير حرام 30 سنة كفاية.
It's so big that people have now spilled out into other streets, other alleyways, and some of the squares that are just off the main Liberation Square. And really, you feel that it's just growing. There's just more and more people joining in.
The atmosphere there really was more like some kind of a rock festival, if you like, Egypt's Woodstock, more than a demonstration.
The police, normally everywhere, are nowhere.
Since the violent protests of Friday, the only visible manifestations of the police in Cairo have been limited traffic directing duties. The ultimate responsibility for the security of the demonstration has fallen to the army.
The president himself, he has tried to appease the public, he has sacked the government, he has appointed a new government, he's tried to announce new initiatives, appoint a vice president. All of that has only brought out more people day after day, day after day. It does not seem that they are going to be easily satisfied unless the president himself stands down.
A lot of people here are telling us they're extremely frustrated. They don't understand why the president, in their own words, is not getting their message.
I think when the images became apparent that they exceeded 1 million people, that in fact so many walks of life had come to Tahrir Square, it simply was no longer possible for the government to avoid it. It was simply no longer possible for the senior leadership of this government to try and just simply address the issue with political maneuvering.
Let's bring you up with the latest lines coming out on this developing story. Now, it's being reported that the Egyptian President Hosni Mubarak will speak to the people soon.
As President Mubarak was about to address the nation, there was a feeling of genuine excitement amongst the protesters. I was in the square as the screen flashed up with President Mubarak's image, and protesters ran to the screen.
I did not intend to run for the coming presidency. I have exhausted my life serving Egypt and its people. I tell you in plain words that in the few months remaining in my current term, I will work towards ensuring the measures and procedures that will guarantee the peaceful transition of power.
People were really heckling, people were chanting in the crowd. Clearly this falls far short of what their demands were.
Feeling here has gone into possibly that of anger. They are extremely furious. They don't understand how the sheer amount of numbers that have come out in the streets in recent days has not been enough to convince them.
It galvanized and inspired, and perhaps with the help of other elements, triggered a great deal of pro-Mubarak supporters who felt that the president had been humbled, that the president had been, in some ways forced into this position. And what we saw afterwards triggered a lot of violence.
As we were trying to make our way out of Tahrir Square, a lot of the protesters were actually trying to make their way back into the square and telling us not to leave, not to leave, that there were reports of pro-Mubarak supporters heading into the heart of downtown to Tahrir Square to confront the protesters.
It isn't quite clear who the Mubarak supporters are, but with their arrival comes violence.
Okay. Do you hear the gunfire?
We hear shots being fired.
Well, clearly the confrontations seem to have begun between the two sides. We have seen dozens of the protesters dispersed, run in different directions. There's clearly a sense of panic here.
US President Obama speaks to Mubarak for 30 minutes on the telephone. America urges the Egyptian president to back down.
After his speech, I spoke directly to President Mubarak. He recognizes that the status quo is not sustainable and that a change must take place.
Other Arab governments are already feeling the effect of the masses in Liberation Square. Ali Abdullah Saleh, Yemen's president of 30 years, announces he will step down in 2013. But the Egyptian regime is not going quietly.
No one should forget that President Mubarak is the one who brought peace to our country. For 30 years, we haven't had any wars.
The day after the Million Man March, we could see these groups of pro-Mubarak supporters now hitting the streets.
Kind of slogans they've been shouting are, with our blood and our souls, we will sacrifice for Mubarak.
State TV is reporting that they are warning people of expected violence around the protests today.
I was in the middle of a pro-Mubarak demonstration. The people I met were really very, very frenzied, very, very heated.
At the moment, it is a war of voices as to who can chant the loudest.
The pro-Mubarak supporters came all the way right into the heart of Tahrir Square. They faced off with the anti-government protesters. There was not a security officer of any description, no police, no army, no anybody to try and keep these two sides apart. They were face to face, Egyptian to Egyptian, with just millimeters apart.
Yes, I believe that clashes have erupted between both the supporters, and you can see it underway on this square.
If we're going to call them protesters, they're throwing stones at people, and people are getting wounded. Here's one who's completely messed up, passing in front of me. He's very badly wounded. Suddenly we saw rocks flying in all directions. I can't tell you exactly who was throwing them. It was total mayhem. And then, if you can imagine, it was a complete stampede. Hundreds of people turning back and trying to run the other way. I saw people being trampled on, and I myself have been hit on the face, punched in the eye.
From nowhere, a charge of 8 people riding horses and one guy riding a camel have come charging up the street on the pro-Mubarak side and have hit the anti-government protesters who had made a linked arms to stop this, hit them at full force, burst through.
of the young men who'd come out, particularly on the pro-Mubarak side, it was almost like a day out for them. I got the impression that they were really enjoying themselves. It was almost like a real-life video game. Some demonstrators had taken up vantage points on top of nearby buildings, and they were throwing huge slabs of rock, chairs, all sorts of projectiles at the anti-government demonstrators below. It was an extremely violent scene.
As darkness falls, Egypt descends into chaos.
They were smashing the lights on the street so that everything went dark. They were covering their faces with balaclavas. They were making the makeshift bombs, the homemade bombs in the canisters in front of us.
We've lost a lot of people, and we've lost them for a cause. The cause is that we wanted Mubarak to be out. We owe it to them to stick it till the end. They are shooting. There are people, there are some of the thugs with rifles on the bridge, and they shot at our demonstrators. Like the latest of our dead protesters, he was shot right through the head. I had 2 friends watching this happen. We are not leaving this place till Mubarak leaves.
For the journalists who were witnessing it, what you were seeing was a brutality that completely disrupted what had been a very peaceful protest. These images were frightening to see. People in cars just trying to drive over protesters.
For his safety, one of our correspondents spends the night in a mosque on Tahrir Square with the pro-democracy demonstrators.
This university lecturer, as he was explaining to me, he was just crying his eyes out at the struggle that was taking place, of how badly he wanted freedom and of how close they were getting to freedom. And you could see in their face that there was an incredible amount of determination, but there was also this hint of fear that perhaps that taste of freedom they'd had the day before was going to be all they were going to get.
Well, I'm actually in the middle of Tahrir Square, of Liberation Square, and this is a scene of a battlefield. There is no other way to describe it. There are still many injured people here. The faces I'm looking at are just of sheer exhaustion, of fear, of panic. I've spoken to 2 doctors. They counted 7 dead bodies yesterday. So I'm looking at one man now who's walking towards me. His entire garments are bloodied, have blood stains across them. The man next to him has some sort of eye patch covering his eye. It is really difficult to look around without seeing someone with some sort of injury.
Later in the day, Egypt's Ministry of Health reports 13 dead and 1,200 injured.
Once the sun had come up, I left the mosque to come outside and see what was the new reality. There were so many weary and wounded people. They were laying on the grass, laying on the pavement. There were a lot of wounded people still with bandages around their head. People were wearing head protection, saucepans and plastic bottles, anything that could give them some kind of protection. It just felt like the morning after a war.
Pitched battles continue in the side streets around Liberation Square. But the feeling in the square itself is that the pro-democracy protesters have stood their ground.
The minute the dawn came, the minute the light came up, everybody was very, very happy. Everybody was smiling. I think you can hear some chanting and some songs being broadcasted on the PA system. People are very happy that they have survived the night. They think they have been victorious.
There is still huge resistance here. The chants are still going, Thawra, Thawra, hatta al-Nasr, revolution, revolution, until victory.
There's increasing evidence now that the so-called pro-Mubarak demonstrators are in fact policemen and paid thugs.
one of the metro stations here in Tahrir Square has been transformed into a makeshift holding cell where the pro-democracy demonstrators have put people in them who were involved in the violence. And those people, one of them have shown me the ID card, which clearly shows that they belong to the state police.
A lot of people, who captured some of these pro-Mubarak supporters, then later confessed that they were paid or given, a few dollars here and there to come and agitate the protesters.
And a lot of the times they were handing these people who they'd arrested over to the military.
Now it appears to be the opposition demonstrators who appear to have the upper ground. They have advanced. They've taken over 2 flyovers, which lead towards the bridge.
Sorry, when you say opposition demonstrators, do you mean those opposing the government or those opposing the government?
Anti-government demonstrators. They were using almost like medieval battleground techniques, using pieces of corrugated iron as shields, literally pushing forward.
So far, the army has done nothing to protect the anti-government protesters.
The army just pretty much seemed to melt away, and they just stood back and watched it happen. It was quite shocking.
They were not willing to try and stop this fight. And I think everybody was pretty shocked and pretty disappointed. But as for anger being shown towards the military, I didn't really see any of that, but that's probably because any attempt to show any animosity towards the military would only create a weakness in the battle itself.
In a way, it would have been difficult. Who would the army have fired on? Because the protesters were so mixed up at that stage.
Now, finally, it acts to separate the two sides. President Mubarak's government denies any part in the violence. It blames foreign spies and international media.
What you don't want as a journalist is to become part of the story. You want to report the story, but the government, the authorities, almost made us actors in this drama. They accused us of inciting the violence. So it was very difficult for us. Not only was there the general insecurity on the streets, but also the sense that we were being targeted ourselves.
Pictures of an Israeli passport put up. Foreigners were described as saboteurs. They were described as armed, some of them, and that they were trying to destabilize the state.
The mood on the street shifts to fear and anger at anyone who looks like a foreigner.
And we ended up in this fairly large square. I haven't a clue where it was, with a very large crowd there, chanting and pushing towards the cars. There were people with sticks, people with machetes, and then it was escalated. People were climbing on the car. I saw at the corner of my eye at this armored personnel carrier, thankfully, and soldiers were getting out of that, and they were firing live shots over the heads of these people. We were pushed into the back of this armored personnel carrier, and we were then handed over to the secret police. And then we were pushed into a bus, and the mood had changed dramatically at that point, because the bus moved forward, and the crowds were bashing against the windows of the bus. About half an hour later, we realized there were other journalists, every nationality you could think of. Not only that, humanitarian aid workers, doctors, business people. They basically orchestrated a huge campaign to pull in foreigners and to convince the general public that this was wholly an international plot.
We condemn in the strongest terms attacks on reporters covering the ongoing situation in Egypt.
Egypt's government is forced to apologize.
I apologized through all the media channels. I apologized through all the TV channels that I spoke with today. I apologized as a man who accepts responsibility.
The government offers another concession.
The president said, I will not nominate myself for presidency in the next elections, and therefore no one from his family will run. Neither the president nor his son will run.
Hosni Mubarak is determined to stay in power until his term ends in September.
He still does control the economy, he still does control the security forces, and he has very good relations with the army. The system has not abandoned him, and that's how he managed to survive.
Calm returns to Liberation Square. The army tightly controls entry points and keeps Mubarak supporters out. Inside, protesters are as defiant as their president.
The day of departure. The anti-Mubarak camp wants the biggest demonstration yet. The army has already moved into place. They say this is to keep both sides apart.
The government tries a new tactic. Egypt's new defense minister visits Liberation Square and pleads with protesters to go home. The numbers in Liberation Square keep rising. It's now a city within a city.
Tahrir Square itself, that half-kilometre, is a living, breathing example of real democracy. The fact that you see people from different social classes mixing together, people from the religious people, secular people, Muslims, Christians. It's a real melting pot, and it's very democratic because anyone has the right to speak. The very fact that they're allowed to speak their minds is seen as an achievement in itself.
Opposition groups are still rejecting offers from the government to negotiate. They want Mubarak out now.
He should hear the clear voice coming from the people and live in dignity.
America seems to agree.
In order for Egypt to have a bright future, which I believe it can have, the only thing that will work is moving a orderly transition process that begins right now.
Minutes away from the military lockdown near Liberation Square, downtown Cairo is bustling. Banks open for the first time in a week, petrol stations stocked. But everyone here knows it's still not business as usual.
It's not easy to keep a mass protest going for 12 days.
People want to feel that normality is back, that it's safe to go about their business, that people can open their shops, people can go to school or whatever. So there is that thirst for normality. And yet there remains this focal point, Tahrir Square, which is completely closed to traffic and is still the epicenter of this protest. It seems that people will go about their normal business during the day, but when it's a day of demonstration, they will go to the square. They may only go for an hour or two, they may go early in the morning, they may go late at night, but the demonstration lives on, but life is going on as well.
There is yet another plea to the occupants of Liberation Square.
The head of the Army's Central Command came to ask them to go home so the country could go back to normal. They chanted back, "We're not leaving, he is."
And another attempt to appease the protesters.
Egyptian TV announces big changes in the ruling party. Gone are the executive committee and the president's son, Gamal Mubarak. But it's the father who's got to go for the demonstrators.
The presidency, though, is still a non-negotiable.
You don't run a country as an autocratic leader for 29 years without being extremely tough, extremely stubborn and a real survivor. You know, he's not going to leave unless he's literally shoved out of the door by those closest to him, like his Vice President Omar Suleiman. This man is a survivor, this man is a fighter, this man wants to secure his place in history. He doesn't want to go down in the history books as a man who ran away or who was chased out by a baying mob. He's going to hang in there really for as long as he can.
It's clear that Egypt will never be the same again.